I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, we have some serious topics that we needed to talk about today, and then some other ones that we're trying to get into just to kind of bring some awareness up. But I guess we're going to start with the kind of the serious topic first.
I'm glad to be with you today, Renee, for sure, and really excited to have you all with us today. We've got a special treat. Our department chair, Dr. Jeff Stringer, is going to be presenting on timber theft and trespass. It's certainly an issue, Renee, that's really important to woodland owners when it happens, and we'll talk with Dr. Stringer a little bit more about that. He'll give us some good information. And if unfortunately it happens to you, knowing what to do and who to contact and how to kind of navigate that's really important. So Dr. Stringer will help us with that as well. Then we want to talk to you all a little bit about soil sampling. That's really an important thing. You know, a lot of people may be thinking about tree planting and other projects coming up next year. So, getting ready for those, making sure we got the right soil is a really important aspect of that. And that's one of the things that our county extension offices all across Kentucky do for landowners. So if you need to get soil samples, check in with your local county extension agent and they can help you with that. And we'll have a brief video on that. And then we've got something from Dr. Ellen Crocker, and you may be seeing this along the roadsides real soon if you haven't already. This is something that kind of reoccurs every year around this time, and we get lots of questions about it. So Dr. Crocker preemptively has got us some information on that. So really delighted to have you all with us. As Renee said, you can use the chat function to interact with us, or you can hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu. But just delighted to be here.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and get started. So Dr. Stringer, if you'd like to turn your camera on. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and we're going to talk about an important topic to woodland owners in Kentucky, and I would say for the region, actually. And that's timber trespass and theft. And we're going to focus on, from a landowner's perspective, what risks are, what our laws are, and ultimately, most importantly, how to protect yourself and your woodlands, and knowing what your responsibilities are and how to protect yourself. So we're going to deal with that topic, and we'll go ahead and get started with this. And we're going to share a screen with you. And hopefully everybody can see this.
Looks good.
And we're gonna go through this, and I'm gonna share some resources with you and things of that nature we've got to kind of back up and support what we're going to be talking about today. So obviously this is an important issue to deal with, and I'm going to share some statistics with you on this issue. Okay. And so we did a survey a number of years ago, but I think the data is still pretty good. We're going to refresh it. But what we did is we went and we surveyed and determined the cases of unauthorized cutting or timber trespass and theft throughout by county throughout Kentucky. And this map you see here shows you the information that we got back at that time. Now, some of the counties are white, and that simply means we didn't hear about any cases of timber trespass or theft, the unauthorized cutting of someone's timber from those counties. Doesn't mean that some of that didn't occur. So when you look at this map, what it shows you is there's a low level of occurrence of this throughout the state. Okay, there's a particularly higher level in the notice the red counties. They're in far eastern Kentucky, and we're going to talk about that just in a little bit. So this shows us that it's an issue that goes on throughout the Commonwealth. Okay, now a lot of times when this issue occurs of unauthorized cutting of timber, a lot of people think it's automatically a logger is purposely trying to theft timber, and that's simply not the case. Okay, and what we want to do now is for each of the incidences that were recorded that you saw on that map, I'm going to share with you who's responsible for those different issues, and I think some of that may be just a little surprising, okay, to you. Okay, so if you look at what caused the problem of the unauthorized cutting, we see that 41% of the time it was because the property line was unknown or it was disputed. and another 21% of the time where the landowner misrepresents the boundaries. So if you combine those, what we're saying here, 62% of the time, a unauthorized cut is due basically to the landowner not knowing where the boundary is or misrepresenting it, either by mistake or on purpose. Okay, and that does happen. Okay, so 62% of the cases that we have in Kentucky is a landowner issue. Okay, it's not a logger issue, it's a landowner issue. Now, the rest of the percentage then, okay, was dealing with a logger who intentionally crossed the boundary, okay, and cut some trees, which is of course not a good thing, right? All right. And we'll talk just a little bit more about that here in a few minutes, okay? But the point of the matter is this, okay? Landowners have responsibility in this to know where their boundaries are at, okay? And loggers have the responsibility to cut where they're supposed to be, okay? So there's two parties involved here, and that's important to realize in all this, okay? This is a little information kind of by region of the state, west, central, and east. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It just shows you there's a difference in the size or the acreage that's involved, depending on where you're at in the state. In east, it's a little higher, 31 acres on average involved. Central Kentucky, 5 acres involved. Western Kentucky, 9. Okay. If you look at the bottom of each one of those tables for each one of the different areas, you see the dollars in stumpage value or value of timber. That's called stumpage value, what the value of the timber is on the stump, if you will, in the woods, was $2,500 in Western Kentucky, Central Kentucky, $4,900, and Western Kentucky, $7,800. So there's a difference in dollar amount depending upon where you're at in the state. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why these numbers are important here in a few minutes, okay? Let me give you a little bit more information on these cases. About 58%, 60% roughly of the cases that we had in this survey were settled outside of court, which is not surprising, right? And 18% or so were settled in court, and we had a number of them that were still unresolved when we did the study, which is to be expected, right? And they eventually get resolved, a lot of times outside of court. Okay. Now, let's talk about damages paid, and I'm going to explain more what damages means. But think about it from the standpoint of if you had timber that was cut on you, unauthorized cut on you, right? You would have the damages would be the value of the timber, of course. It could be fees that you had to pay in order to get this settled in court, surveyor fees, that kind of thing. We'll talk more about that here in a minute, okay? But if you look at the damages paid here, single damages, which means the landowner was compensated for the value of the timber that was cut on their authorized cut on their property and the cost of any other costs they had and that kind of thing. Double damages was 17 as you move to the right on this table. And triple damages was almost 50% of the time triple damages was paid. And we had one case where there was more than triple damages paid. But the reason the triple damages is kind of raises its head here is because the timber trespass law that we have stipulates that an unauthorized cut, if certain things weren't done, then the rightful owner of the timber gets paid triple damages. And we'll talk more about that. I'm going to explain the law. I'm going to explain that issue in detail, okay? Legal fees come into play here, and 45% of the time, the trespasser paid all the legal fees for the landowner. 32% of the time, the trespasser paid part of it, and 22% of the time, the trespasser paid no legal fees. So sometimes these legal fees are a part of the damages, and a few times they weren't. And we'll talk about more about that here in a minute, okay? Now, those are some statistics. Now, we have a very useful resource that I would suggest that anybody is interested or is involved in this topic, wants to get more information. We have a really nice publication, Timber Theft and Trespass, and you can get it at our website, which is www.ukforestry.org. Go to publications and you can find this publication. It's a 10-page publication. It explains what the laws are, and we're going to do that. We're going to go through this publication, basically explain what the laws are, your responsibility as the landowner, what those responsibility for loggers are, all that kind of thing. So this is a great resource that supports this topic. And if you want to get more information on it, I strongly suggest you go there and get this publication downloaded as a PDF. Okay. All right. So let's define a couple things. We've used this term timber theft, and I've been using the terms timber theft and trespass. They're two different things. Timber theft implies an intent to steal. Okay. It involves a criminal trespass and involves stolen property. Criminal laws were broken. One was trespass and one was stolen property. And if you think about it, how do you define the timber that you own? You define it because it's on your property. Okay. Somebody might be able to steal your car, for example, and not trespass on your property. You could have it parked on the road somewhere in a parking lot, and they could steal it and not trespass on your property. However, with timber, okay, the way it's recognized as yours is because you own the property. Therefore, there has to be a criminal trespass involved in the thefting of your timber. So that's an important topic that we'll come back to in a little bit. So timber theft implies intent to steal and involves a proof of a criminal trespass and stolen property as well. Okay, now I've used the term timber trespass. What is that? That's an unintentional cutting. And there's an unauthorized harvest, but it wasn't intentional. And by the way, this gets back to those situations where the boundary line wasn't well defined or well established or known. Okay, all of those contribute to this timber trespass issue. And now we're going to delve into both these in just a little bit, but I wanted to set us up and so that you understand these are two different. There are two different issues that we're dealing with. There's a theft problem because many of our woodlands exist in places where nobody is watching close. And this is particularly true for Eastern Kentucky with the topography we have there. Western Kentucky, certainly there can be woods and trees that are out of sight, but it's more prevalent in Eastern Kentucky. And our big timber theft issues that tend to occur in Eastern Kentucky. The other thing that causes us problems and causes part of this problem to stay with us is that local law enforcement doesn't have the resource or skill set to actively engage or to garner evidence, right, that allows for successful prosecution. And I'm not slamming local law enforcement at all. But the fact of the matter is, there are often cases where they're not sure where the boundary's at. They don't have a surveyor back in the office that they could call and come out and survey a property boundary, right? Logs don't have VIN numbers. While they're traceable, and we can talk about that, but they don't have VIN numbers. They don't have barcode, those kind of things, right? So unless you're really equipped to deal with investigating timber trespass or theft cases, okay, it's hard to do for local law enforcement, and that causes a problem with following up on some of these situations. And the civil laws that we have, we mentioned those, do exist where somebody sues somebody over an unauthorized cut, right? Those civil laws burden you as a landowner with upfront costs of paying for a survey or paying for a consultant forester to tell you how much the value was cut, paying attorney fees, all those kind of things. So that burdens the landowner upfront with those costs. So all of those things combined tend to cause those individuals that are engaged in flat out timber theft, right? It causes them not to be too deterred, let's say, okay? And this situation is not, it's common in Kentucky, but it's also common in a lot of states around surrounding us as well, okay? Now, let's talk about timber trespass for a minute, okay? Why is there timber trespass going on? That's the unintentional cutting of timber, okay? Well, one of the reasons we got a problem with that is because the boundaries are not well marked in the woods. A lot of landowners don't have boundaries marked, and that opens you up to a situation where if the boundary's not well marked, that there could be an honest mistake be made in the woods, okay? And something we've already talked about is landowners sometimes don't know their boundaries or cannot describe them well. That happens a lot, more than you would think it would, okay? And this can particularly happen in cases where you may have a spouse that's not familiar with land, you know, and the boundaries and those kind of things, engage in a sale of timber and those kind of things. So there's issues that come up here and do occur, okay? And obviously we can have boundary disputes. Our meets and bounds system, and some of our deeding and that kind of thing can cause some issues between landowners from time to time. So we have boundary disputes that goes on, okay? And quite honestly, another problem here that can cause some of this to occur is that because of the small amount involved, like Western Kentucky, $2,500 per case, that can kind of dissuade people from I guess, following through with some of this in a real rigorous way. And that can cause people to be sloppy with their overall, or trying to figure out where a boundary is. So all these issues, you know, are there that tend to cause us a problem with timber trespass, which again which is that unintentional cutting of timber over a boundary. So we have laws on the books, of course, criminal laws, and we have civil laws. The criminal laws involve criminal trespass, we've already mentioned that, and a criminal theft. The civil laws deal with suing for unauthorized cutting. And in Kentucky, we have a civil law that deals with that. It's called the timber trespass law. We're going to go over that with detail so you understand it and understand how to protect yourself. And there's elements in that law that help you do that, okay? So I'll mention this real quick, that criminal trespass. So now we're talking about the criminal laws involving trespass. In our law books in Kentucky, there's a difference between what can happen to one that trespasses by breaking in a building. That is more arduous, or, you know, there's more penalty for that than a trespass out in the open. Now, this is what our laws say about woods or open spaces being like a field, for example, or a surface mine, something like that, okay? If you knowingly cross a boundary, okay, so in this case, the boundary is out in the woods or in a field, and you knowingly cross the boundary. If there was a fence that defines the boundary, not all fences do or accurately placed, but if the fence defines the boundary, then and you can prove that somebody crossed that, then it's a second degree Class B misdemeanor, $250 fine, potentially 3 months, you know, and restitution of damages. If there's no fence there, okay, then it is a misdemeanor $100 fine and restitution damages. So you can see that the criminal penalty, okay, for crossing a boundary out in the woods, if it's not fenced, is not very much, okay, all right, and it tends to be not a deterrent for those that are interested in thefting timber, okay. Now, criminal theft, of course, everybody knows there's laws on the books that say, hey, you cannot steal somebody's property, right? Okay, we all know that. If in the case of timber, if you can prove the criminal trespass, right, and then you can have the potential of proving the theft of timber. If you have over $500 removed, then it's a felony, 5 years in prison, restitution damages, that kind of thing, and a 5-year statute of limitations. Okay, so those are our criminal laws that deal with criminal trespass and criminal theft. Okay, so now we want to deal with the civil law, which is what we call the timber trespass law for short. It is KRS, that's Kentucky Revised Statute 364.130. Go look in the law books, look it up on the internet, and you can find this law, which I have, and I know you can't read it on the screen, but this is the entire law. It's not very long. Like I say, you can go online and get it. If you get our publication, it will have that in it as well. So what I'm going to do now is go over this timber trespass law so you understand it, okay? So it's 364.130. It's technically called, if you look it up, it doesn't say timber trespass law. We just call it that for short because the true title of it is Drift Logs and Timber Liability of Persons Entering Upon and Cutting Timber Growing Upon Land of Another, which is way too much of a mouthful as a title. So we call it the timber trespass law for short, okay? It has 4 sections. It is a section that deals with the liability of an unauthorized cutting of timber. Section 2 is actually a method to reduce that liability. So there's a method here that the law prescribes to help reduce that liability. Section 3 simply references other laws, and then a new section that was added fairly recently. And this law was put into effect in the 90s, but recently there was an addition of a Section 4 that deals with fence row maintenance. So we'll go over that as well. We'll spend most of our time with Section 1 and 2, but I will talk about the fence row maintenance. Okay, so Section 1, and I put all the words in Section 1 are up here, okay, but I've highlighted several sections that we'll go through this, okay? So it starts out by saying this: any person, regardless of their state of mind, so we can't tell whether you're meaning to or not, right? But any person, or whether the person believes to be authorized or not, who cuts down, saws down, or causes to be cut or sawed down to convert to their own use timber growing upon the land of another. So what does this say? This section simply says, right, regardless of the state of your mind, whoever cuts down or cause to be cut down timber that's grown upon another, right? That's the subject of this section, okay? Shall pay to the rightful owner of the timber 3 times the stumpage value. So that's the value of the timber as it exists in the tree, okay? So 3 times the stumpage value of the timber, and shall pay the rightful owner of the property 3 times the cost of any damages. And we'll talk more about damages in detail here in a minute. So what this section says is somebody cuts, saws down, or somebody causes to be sawed down. If you're a landowner and you tell the logger the boundary goes to a certain spot, and you're actually describing a spot that's on somebody else's land, you may be viewed as having caused that timber to be cut on another person's property, okay? And if that happens, somebody owes somebody 3 times the value of the timber and the damages. That 3 times the damages is in effect unless you follow the steps in Section 2. So Section 2 does what? It provides a means of reducing the 3 times stumpage damage and the legal fees and that kind of thing, okay? So what is Section 2? Now, I'm not going to put Section 2 up there. I'm going to summarize it because it's a little easier to do this way, okay? First of all, there has to be proof in writing that a logger is operating on a piece of property legally, okay? That requires that you as a landowner and a logger have a written agreement between themselves, which indicates where that property is that the logger is going to be accessing the timber on, okay? So that's the first thing that Section 2 requires. That has to be in place. So a handshake deal between you and a logger is problematic for everybody. It's problematic for the logger. We teach this in the Master Logger program. We say, if you got what they call a boundary of timber, but if you got tract of timber, you're engaged with the landowner in getting ready to cut it, and there's some issues, or you think the boundaries might not be clear, or whatever, you think there's risk, you got to get this agreement in writing, okay? So a handshake deal won't work here as far as reducing damages, okay? Secondly, the adjacent landowner has to be notified in writing 7 days in advance of the harvest starting, okay? And the law specifies that notification has to be sent certified mail, return receipt requested, indicating that you have proof, or somebody has proof, that the adjacent landowner was notified in writing 7 days in advance, okay? Now, I'm going to take off what I just flipped up on the screen just for a second. The adjacent landowner has 7 days to respond to this written notice, okay? And if they respond back or object to that, okay, then if a harvest occurs, and if the landowner's objected, right, and there is an unauthorized cutting of trees, then that landowner is subject to get 3 times. You're back to the 3 times damages. If the landowner doesn't respond in 7 days, or if they do not object, right, and you have satisfied this Section 2 here, these stipulations, then the rightful owner only gets the reasonable value of the timber. So that's 1 times the value instead of 3, if you will, and the actual damage instead of 3 times. It's just the actual damages. So this Section 2 provides a mechanism to help protect everybody involved, the logger and you, the landowner who's getting their timber harvested of this, All right. Now, if you're a landowner that gets this notice, you need to respond to this, and you need to respond quickly in writing. And the law doesn't specify this, but in my opinion, you need to have proof that you sent this objection. Okay. And it's got to be done fairly quickly. All right. So let me summarize this timber trespass law. It states that the owner of the timber that was cut, okay, unauthorized, gets 3 times stumpage, that's the value of the timber in the tree, and 3 times any damages, unless the specific stipulations are followed that reduces that 3 times to the actual value, okay, which is 1 times the actual stumpage value and the damages, okay? And that requires that a notification is sent to adjacent landowner that a harvest is going to be done, and there was no objection to that. Okay, and all that's got to be done in advance of the harvest. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this law, it does not specify who is supposed to notify the adjacent landowner. Okay. If you're cutting your timber, you could notify it in writing your adjacent landowner. A consultant forester that's helping you, they typically will do that notification. The logger getting ready to cut the timber could notify the adjacent landowner. So the law doesn't specify who's required to do that. It just says if you want to reduce damages, then that needs to be done. You know, and obviously there can be no objection to the boundary. Okay. Now we mentioned that we talk about damages here. Damages are, of course, we mentioned it before, the stumpage value or the value of the timbers that exist in the tree. Damages could be any damage to roads, trails, landings, fences, property, the treetops, removal, all those kind of things can be treated as a damage. And the fees paid to get a consulting forester to determine the value of the timber that was lost. Maybe a surveyor has to be called in, a lawyer, those kind of things. All those things can be viewed as damages, okay, that the timber trespass law encompasses, okay? Now we'll finish this up with talking about risk factors for landowners having their timber harvested. Let's say you're going to harvest your timber. What's a risk factor? Well, not knowing your property line is a risk factor. It's not on the logger to know where your property line's up. That's a landowner responsibility. Know your property lines, okay? Not having the timber harvest boundaries marked is a problem. The harvested boundary, it could be your boundary line, needs to be clearly marked. So there's, and if you're going to have a written agreement or a contract with a logger, it's going to specify what those markings are. So you've proven now that you've done your duty as a landowner to make sure that the property line is none. And if the logger steps over it, then you can prove that it's not your responsibility for that. It's loggers. Okay. Harvesting without a contract or timber sale agreement puts you at risk as well. Lack of supervision is also a problem. Okay. And if the timber buyer is different from the logger, and this often happens where, you know, you may have a timber buyer and that timber buyer gets a logger to log it. You got to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. And oftentimes the landowner, you're talking to the timber buyer, not necessarily to the logger. That logger needs to know what's happening. So all of these things, or lack thereof, increase your risk for a problem if you're selling your timber. So make sure you've handled your responsibilities, okay? And also, and I failed to mention this, I just put it up on the screen, not notifying the adjacent landowners. Make sure they get notified, okay? If you're not harvesting timber, you're just a woodland owner, you're trying to protect yourself from that. The biggest issue you can have is having your boundaries unmarked. Because if they're not marked, right, how do you prove somebody knowingly crossed the boundary? If it's not, you know, if it's not known or shown in the woods, right? So mark your boundaries, post them, whatever you need to do. Make sure that boundary marking is adequate, that anybody that's walking or working around a logger on an adjacent piece of property can easily see where the boundary markings are with paint, signs, all those kind of things, okay? If you've got an adjacent logging operation, my recommendation is to talk to your adjacent landowner. If you know them, talk to the logger and say, hey, see that you got a logging operation going on, just want you to know, boundaries up here, it's marked, and we just want to make sure there's not going to be any problems. You got any issue, let's go look at it. So that kind of engagement helps you out, I think, anyhow. If your property is a remote location, you're absentee landowner, obviously that's a risk factor. So you got to take care of the boundary marking and those kind of things. If you have highly valuable timber, a lot of white oak right now, that they're probably a little more at risk than a black gum, for example. Okay. And so those are risk factors for you as a landowner, and you need to take care of your business. And I'll finish up with this. I mentioned that section 4, which was line trees. What this section was recently put in, and basically what it says, and you can read through it, and you could get the publication, read through it, get online, 364.130 KSR, that's the law number, and you can look it up. But basically what this says is if there's an unintentional cutting of trees while you're, clearing a fence row or something like that, then the adjacent adjoining property owner is only liable for the actual value of the trees and legal costs and those kind of things. So they put a little provision here that some of these things apply for the clearing of a fence row or a boundary line. Okay, so that's the timber trespass law, and that's theft information as well. We covered a lot of ground. There's a lot to it. The nice thing about it is we have that resource, that publication that you can get at ukforestry.org. Go to publications, get that, and we can answer more questions about that. Certainly on those issues, we answer questions all the time for landowners wanting to protect their property or that have had a unauthorized cut happen. And remember, the key here, that just because there was an unauthorized cut, it's not necessarily the logger's fault. 62% of the time, it's not. So if you're a landowner and you're doing a timber harvest, you take care of your business. Know where your boundaries are, get them marked. If you're wanting to protect your top property, do the smart thing. Get your boundaries marked, all that kind of thing, so you can help prove or help keep people, from making a legitimate mistake, right? All right. And it also indicates that you're a property owner, a woodland owner that cares about their woodlands and is watching what's going on. So all of those reasons, all those things are reasons why that, you want to take care of your business, because ultimately you're the landowner and you're in charge of your property, and you need to make sure it's that you do what you can do to minimize your risk. So a lot of information, but I said we've got a publication available. Please check it out.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stringer. We greatly appreciate that presentation. It definitely would be helpful for people who are in this process to try to get some more information about it. So we greatly appreciate your presentation, and we will have that online on our YouTube channel as well next week. So if anybody needs to go back and try to review some things, they'll be able to see that.
Yeah,
and it's a tough topic, but it's one that we got to deal with, right? And we do a lot of logger training, master logger program. We deal with this issue. Loggers would love to have every property line with a neon sign around the whole thing, right? That would make things easy, because 62% of the time they get caught in something that's not their fault, right? Now, the ones that are their fault, that's a different issue, right? So a lot of this is on the landowner. So I hope the resources that we've got and the information was provided makes sense and can help you out.
Indeed. Dr. Stringer, I'd say we did in the chat pod, we put the link to that page where they can get those publications. We have some more information on that. And I think you bring up a really important point. I think a lot of times for landowners, since they don't deal with harvest operations on a regular basis, they don't have much experience or exposure, and certainly very little expertise in it. I think they may have a tendency to just kind of turn it over, to others and just let them run with it. But I think you bring up a great point that they need to be in charge. It's their property, and they need to feel empowered to be able to, control what's going on their property. So please, landowners and county agents, talk to landowners, let them know that they have every right to, be heavily engaged in that process, and they should be, for sure.
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Stringer. All right, good stuff there. All right, and so we're going to keep the train rolling.
So, yeah, and we're going to be talking about a subject that we can really dig into.
Exactly. No, what she's talking about is soil sampling, right? So, this is a service that many, I believe all of our county extension offices supply. Some of them do have to charge fees for that, and others don't, just based on whatever is going on locally there. So check with your local county extension office on that. They do have publications and other information as well to support taking soil samples, but we thought it might be helpful to show you a short video on how to submit your soil sample for testing. So I'm gonna go ahead, Renee, and get that shared with the group.
And there might be some updated forms as well on this, so just make sure to check with your county agent.
This video will explain the process for taking a soil sample in your field or garden plot. First, you will need to gather a few tools. A soil probe will be your best option for taking soil cores. If you do not have a soil probe, soil cores can be taken with a spade, shovel, knife, or auger. You will need a bucket to collect the cores. The bucket not only serves as a way to carry soil cores, it is also a good container to mix all of the samples together. Finally, you will need the Ag Soil Sample A form. This is available at your county extension office or online. You can also find contact information for your county extension office online. Now that you have your tools together, you're ready to collect soil cores. Use your probe, spade, or auger to collect soil cores. The depth at which you take the sample will depend on the site. If the area has been tilled conventionally, meaning the soil has consistently been tilled in every year prior to planting, you will need a deeper core sample. This depends on the depth of the tillage. If you till about 8 inches deep, then you need about a 6 to 8 inch sample. If the area you are sampling has not been tilled, such as a pasture or a no-till field, the core will only need to be about 3 to 4 inches deep. With soil sampling, the more core samples you have, the better. Plan to collect a series of soil cores throughout the area you are sampling. The University of Kentucky recommends 30 cores representing fields larger than 5 acres. After collecting all of the soil cores, thoroughly mix the samples. A fine granular structure is what is required to run the soil sample test. Then pour the homogenized mixture of soil in the sample bag provided from the county extension office. Your own bag or container may be used temporarily to transfer your soil sample to your extension office. There, they will provide you with the proper collection sample bag for laboratory processing. The paperwork that accompanies your soil sample is required for processing at the UK Regulatory Service Testing Lab. It is important to fill in as much detail as possible for accurate measurement and results. If you have further questions about taking and submitting a soil sample, the information is online. These University of Kentucky publications are located on the College of Agriculture's website. You can also contact your Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service office for assistance or questions on soil sampling. Information needed on the form are as follows. Section 1. Producer name, address, phone number, and the size of the field that soil tests will be taken from. Section 2 indicates what tests to be run. Select Routine Soil Test. Section 3A is where you record the crop history of the field. Section 3B identifies current crop management. Section 4, fertilizer and lime history are recorded. Section 5A is for tobacco production only. Section 5B allows you to indicate the soil drainage that best describes the site. Sections 6 through 9 are for county and lab use only. After completing the form, submit both the form and sample to your county's extension office. Many counties require you to pay a small fee to process the samples. You will receive results back in about 2 weeks. Results for each nutrient recommendation is reported in pounds per acre. The recommendations provided for each nutrient are a result of information in publication AGR1. All information on your results show up in the boxes at the bottom of the form. Every report comes with comments about the extractions used in the laboratory process, as well as information on fertilizer scheduling or any other information regarding your crop.
You know, that video is really interesting, Billy. There's something that I would have never thought would be to like grab different areas of soil. You know, I would be, okay, I've got one, I'm good. You know, so that was surprising to me that, I mean, I understand it now. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what I should have thought about. But also I had talked to Amanda Gumbert, and she had said to remind viewers that fall and spring are very busy times of year for this. So plan accordingly if you need the soil sample results back, and that some county extension offices actually might have the probe that they can borrow from. So that would be very helpful, because I mean, I don't know, can you just go out and buy one? I don't know.
You may not need it, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that was a lot of good information for people to find out what kind of soil types they have.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's just a gentle reminder to everyone of just how important and how useful our county extension offices are across Kentucky, right? We have one in every county, and they have staff members and extension agents there that are dedicated to their community. So you get to know your local county extension offices and your agents there. They're great people, and they really care about, you know, the community and trying to make sure everybody's doing well. And they have a lot of services, including soil testing. So you get to know your county agents, and you can get your soil tested too.
There you go.
All right, good deal.
All right, so moving on, we have Dr. Ellen Crocker. She's going to do a video for us on a bug that people are seeing right now during this time.
Yeah. So I'll get that queued up for us.
Okay.
Sudden browning of your tree's canopy is typically a major cause for concern. But if it's the middle of summer and you're seeing this on black locust, you might be seeing damage caused by the locust leaf miner. This is a native issue, and while it can look really bad, typically not a major health concern for your trees. Today we're going to talk a little bit about locust leaf miner, what it is, and what it means for your trees. Starting about in the middle of July, black locust trees start to look really bad in our area. Their canopies look scorched with leaves on them that are brown, and those kinds of symptoms, sudden tree death with the leaves still attached, are common in many vascular pathogens that can be major health issues for your trees. But look a little bit more closely at those leaves. If what you're seeing isn't leaves that have shriveled up and died of no apparent reason on the tree, but instead leaves that are covered with insects and eaten up by them, locust leaf miner might be the culprit. This insect gets its name because, one, it really likes black locust, and two, because its larvae are leaf miners. They actually feed inside the leaves in the juicy green part, leaving behind the harder exterior parts of those leaves. Locust leaf miner is a type of beetle in a group that people typically refer to as leaf beetles. It's pretty small and flat. It has a black head and orange wing covers, and those wing covers have a black band down the center as well as ridges on the top. They can go through a couple generations each year. The adult beetles overwinter in the leaf litter or crevices in the bark, and when they emerge in the spring at the same time as those leaves emerge, they'll feed on those leaves as well as lay their eggs. Those eggs hatch into larvae that will feed inside of those leaves, tunneling through them. Locust leaf miners really prefer black locust, and that's where you're going to see them the most. Now, they can occasionally feed on some other trees as well. It's not as common. Black locust typically is not considered a high value tree. It tends to be kind of weedy and a rapid colonizer, a pretty aggressive tree, and you'll find it in a lot of fence roads, roadsides, edges, and other disturbed habitat. In some parts of the world where it's non-native, it can be a nuisance and is even considered invasive. But where we are, it's a native species. And while it might not be a premier timber species or something that people seek out, it's still an important species in these natural areas and very apparent along the highways, which is why it sticks out so much when locust leaf miner is doing its damage. Nonetheless, this is not actually a major health concern for the tree. The damage that locust leaf miner causes can vary year to year. Some years you're going to have bigger outbreaks of it, but it's a native insect and the tree has lived with this for a long time. Typically those trees, they're really resilient and they can recover just fine. In addition, different years you're going to have different amounts of damage caused by the locust leaf miner, and it's unlikely that the same tree is going to be really hit again and again by it. While there are some insecticides that could be used to protect trees from damage by the locust leaf miner, this typically isn't necessary, and those trees will be fine just on their own. One question that you might have as you're seeing these trees with brown canopies is this locust leaf miner something I don't really need to worry about, or is this something more severe? If you've got questions on that, I encourage you to reach out to your county agent or a knowledgeable arborist. There are some more severe things that can cause similar damage, but if it's happening in the middle of the summer and it's on a black locust, I think locust leaf miner is a pretty good bet. If you're wondering what black locust looks like, you can look online for different ID characteristics, but look for those long compound leaves, their beautiful fragrant flowers in the spring, and since they're in the bean family, their seeds are actually in these bean-like seed pods. Thanks for joining us today and learning a little bit more about locust leaf miner. Reach out to us if you have any questions and make sure to follow us online.
I can see why people would be worried about that. That definitely looks like their tree is dying. And there was something wrong with it, severely wrong with it. But then, the next year you figure out, nope, that wasn't it, but that bug almost looked like a lightning bug to me. I was like, oh, I know it has kind of similar characteristics. So I know a lot of bugs look like other bugs. So that's difficult when you're trying to ID them.
Yeah, I think that there's some telltale signs though that kind of will let you know what's going on with that. And appreciate Dr. Crocker putting that video together for us. So if your locusts are having that issue, rest assured it'll probably be okay. So
yeah, she had mentioned to me that she's getting a lot of calls on this, and so she thought that there'd be a really good time for people to be able to see this video and know that hopefully it's just that, and it's not going to be a big issue.
nothing else. Yeah, always you can submit images to us and we'll take a look at them and let you know what we think, and if you need maybe further evaluation.
Yes, and you can just send them to forestry.extension@uky.edu. But that's all we have for today. But we have people that have actually asked for specific topics, and you can do that too. You can go to fromthewoodstoday.com, and we have a little survey there. You can tell us what you're seeing in your woods, and maybe you have a picture or something. You're like, I don't know what this is. Can you tell us what this is on a show topic? And we'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, no doubt. We want to be user inspired. So let us know what you need to be good stewards and learn more about the woodlands and wildlife here in Kentucky. And we want to help you along the way.
Definitely. And again, you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com and see all the shows we've ever done for the last 3 years.
A lot of content.
A lot of content. So we greatly appreciate you joining us, because if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be doing this. So we greatly appreciate you joining us every week at 11 o'clock on Wednesdays. Until then, take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
From the woods today.